All right, this is what no one else is talking about this morning, but we are. Dion Phaneuf, captain for the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Leafs have had a very difficult season. They lost 5-0 recently to the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was asked after the game how embarrassed he was by the loss. And he sat at his locker, and he thought about it, and he thought about it, and he thought about it, and then said to the media reporter, "Have you played sports before?" How would you have reacted if somebody said that to you?
Well, my answer would have been, yes, I have. And is this loss embarrassing to you? Yeah, because, listen, I get it. I completely get it. And especially when you go through an entire season, in a hockey season as long as a basketball season, and you talk to the media every day and sometimes a couple times a day, and you're tired of the questions. I understand that. And you wonder when you hear some of the questions, have you ever experienced a team sport in your life? And I understand that as well. I feel bad for the player, but you have to suck it up and just answer the question. You can give me that response, but then answer the question after that response. Right. But you do understand after a tough loss, a long season, tons of questions they probably didn't want to answer the entire year, why you would get a response like that.
Hypothetically, you've never played sports before, but you're a media member. How would you have reacted?
I would probably give an honest answer. No, I haven't played team sports. But this is an important question, and the readers want to know. But to that point, and we've talked about this on the show before, how the guy in the locker room views the media person.
Right.
So when they look like you, there's much more of a tie because you appear to be an athlete,
right.
And somehow
Wait a minute. I feel slighted here.
You should.
I don't appear to be an athlete too.
My eyes are across the table this way, not this way. but
that was pretty impressive.
Right,
let's make that a clip.
Okay, yes, clip that. But to my point is, at least I can feel like you have been there some way, somehow.
Yeah.
So you're not asking a question that seems absurd and inappropriate. It's more of the vein. Well, the readers want to know, or the folks want to know who are going to be watching the show, as opposed to a guy who's got a beer belly, doesn't appear to have ever played the game, and he seems to. The players push back because it seems like he's taking a dig at you,
right.
As opposed to somebody who's just there, has experienced it. But I kind of have to ask this question, kind of thing. So that's the pushback. So I would imagine you versus a very out of shape writer, you would get more thoughtful, more I've been there kind of answers versus the guy who hasn't, and the player doesn't respect them as much. The locker room is an interesting dynamic, and respect is not just given, it has to be earned.
Yeah.
Guns earn respect, not physical guns, but those guns earn respect.
Right.
Versus a guy with a beer belly, that does not earn respect within the locker room. So depending on who the guy is asking the question will depend on the answer. And I wonder if the guy who asked this question to this player last night was one of those guys I'm talking about, an out of shape guy who doesn't appear to have if he played any kind of sports.
And one more thing about this is there are questions that have to be asked that are obviously they're obvious. Are you embarrassed about the loss? Of course I'm embarrassed about the loss, but I can't say it. We have to have you say it, and you know what I'm saying. Like it's the athletes have to say it. I can't, and so some of the questions that you ask, they're dumb questions, then they're obvious questions, but you have to ask them because you have to get that response so that their quote is the one that's driving the story, not what you're telling is driving the story.
As a player, I always like the reporters who would come in and say, hey, I'm writing an article on this, and I need a quote on this. So I immediately knew what you were looking for, so I can try to give you what you're looking for, but still keep it where it's got some honesty and truth from my perspective.
Yeah.
So, that guy has earned my respect because he's told me what his job is, what he's trying to achieve, and how I can help him.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would say, you know what, I can't help you with that. But as opposed to the guy who just comes up and is firing some seemingly random questions at you, then I've been immediately getting on the defensive and I'm not sure, where are you going with this?
Right. But I think there's a little bit of a difference. If somebody's working on a column, then yes, I agree with you. Hey, can you give me a quote? This is fresh after a loss. I think that's where this quote came from. I mean, you were a monster on the field, but you're a cerebral guy off of it. Did you ever find yourself in that situation as a player where you were steamed after a loss and a guy asked you a question and you didn't want to pop off at him, but emotionally you came close?
I've told people that was not a well-phrased question. That was not a smart question. I've done the Donald Rumsfeld where I answer the question I wished was asked of me instead of the question that was asked to me.
So give us an example. What do you mean?
Make that point. Make the point you want to make.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's are you embarrassed? Instead of asking about myself, this team should be embarrassed. So maybe taking it off of me and putting it on, for a more general kind of theme. Our organization is embarrassed. We've embarrassed the fans of this town instead of me, my personal embarrassment. Right. So you can always spin it and flip it, and you are not obligated to answer that question.
Right.
And I've always told guys, just answer what you want to answer. But make yourself and this team look good.
Right.
You don't have to go out there if a guy sets you up to make everyone look bad. You never want to say anything bad about your teammates. You don't want to throw anybody under the bus. You want to, deflect some praise. You want to take some blame. I mean, some of these basics of being what appears to be a stand-up guy in the locker room are not that difficult to achieve.
I want to go a little bit more in depth on this story, sports and the media. Okay, I've always been a firm believer. I don't have a problem with anonymous sources because if I feel my source is good, I have no problems going with it at all. As an example, let's just use, you're going to be spending the weekend, the Steeler Mafia. Let's use Greg Lloyd as an example. Mm-hmm. And let's say the Steelers at the time were on a 6-game losing streak, all right? And Kevin Green's been playing very, very poor football. And Lloyd comes out and says, one of the reasons why we're playing poor football is because Green's being a very selfish player on the field and he's not doing his job. As a media member, I would say an anonymous Steelers player said this. Would you go with that if Greg Lloyd said that? Or do you have to go on the, if he would not go on the record,
right? Would
you still run with that?
I mean, he would have to know, the way that works with me is,
because everybody's different.
Right. Let's say I asked Chad a question. Chad doesn't want to answer that on the record. And then we just go, okay, off the record, I'll just say a source says. And so that there's an understanding that I'm going to go with whatever you say, but your name's not going to be attached to that in any way, shape, or form. So you have to do that sometimes because there are subjects that people don't want to talk about publicly. But need to be explored in depth, and things that people do want to say, they just don't want their name attached to it. You have to be very, very careful with how you use anonymous sources, and how those things kind of, how they're played within, for me, a newspaper setting. But I don't have a problem with them just as long as everything is kind of on the up and up. I mean, I've used in the last probably year, I've probably had maybe a half dozen stories that have been sourced. And you just have to do that because people aren't going to say things on the record, but they will tell you, and they're not worried about the information getting out there, so it's okay.
In some ways, I think they want it out there.
It kind of depends on the subject, right?
They don't want to attach their name to it,
right?
But they want people to know that Kevin Green, as an example, he's not clearly, is lazy. They want everybody to know this is what is exactly going on right now.
If it's a part of the, when you're attacking another guy, those are weird anonymous stories to kind of write. It's kind of like one teammate attacking another teammate. Okay, well, yeah, obviously we've seen these stories before. I don't know that I would do one of those personally because I think you would I just ask guys, listen, what's the vibe in this locker room? What's the, I think you can still get the gist of what's going on in a locker room, even on the record.
It's not hard to figure out who the anonymous sources are depending on who the writer is, because typically those writers have a relationship with those guys who they go to for those anonymous quotes. So, if it's a guy, within the NFL locker room, if someone's talking negatively about a defensive player and you know who that reporter is, you can go and see who his defensive buddies are in the locker room, who he has a conversation with every time he walks in the door.
Right.
So from a player perspective, it's never really hard to figure out who the source is. Obviously, the public doesn't get to go in the locker room, so they don't get to see those type of interactions. But I'd have to say there's been very, very few circumstances when there's been a anonymous source into a story on the team that I've been on that I haven't been able to quickly figure out who the anonymous source was.
Yeah.
So I think within the team circle, that source is not anonymous. I think everyone knows.
Right.
It may not be said and discussed, but pretty much everybody knows. Yeah. There are some reporters, particularly national guys, who are good at buddying you up in the locker room and then saying, "Let me get your number,"
right,
and then getting you on the phone. So there's not that tie.
So who are you upset with? Are you upset with the reporter, or are you upset with the player?
I am.
Because remember, the media member who wrote it is nothing more than the conduit. It's the old saying, "Why are you shooting the messenger?"
It's case by case, because there are some media guys who are bomb throwers, and that's what they do. That's their preferred style. So that guy, I know the reporters don't have the responsibility of trying to build the team up. That's not what they're there for. But also, your responsibility is also not to bring the team down either.
Right.
So I don't. Can a player occasionally slip up and say something he shouldn't? Yes, but a reporter shouldn't be trying to undermine the team process either.